Japan just made the largest single purchase of American cruise missiles in its post-war history. 400 Tomahawk missiles, each one capable of striking targets over 1,000 miles away. That range puts Beijing, Shanghai, and nearly every major Chinese military installation within reach. For a country that's maintained a defensive-only posture for 8 decades, this is a fundamental transformation, not just an upgrade. And China's response tells you everything you need to know about how threatened they actually are. Here's the problem China now faces. For decades, their strategy in the East China Sea relied on one critical assumption: Japan couldn't hit back. Sure, Japan had one of the world's most capable navies, advanced destroyers, sophisticated air defense systems, but their weapons were short-range. Designed to defend the home islands, not to project power across the region. If tensions escalated, China could launch missiles from deep inside their territory, safely out of Japan's reach, and Tokyo would have no way to respond in kind. That imbalance shaped everything. It gave Beijing confidence to expand in the South China Sea, to militarize artificial islands, to pressure Taiwan with near-daily air incursions. Because at the end of the day, Japan's military might didn't include the one capability that matters most in modern warfare: the ability to hold an adversary's homeland at risk. Until now. The central question driving this entire shift is simple. Can Japan's acquisition of long-range strike weapons fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Western Pacific? And if so, what does that mean for China's regional ambitions? When to understand why 400 Tomahawks matter so much, you need to understand what changed in Tokyo's thinking. For the entire post-World War II period, Japan operated under what it called an exclusively defense-oriented policy. No offensive weapons, no capabilities designed to strike enemy territory. This wasn't just tradition, it was written into defense policy documents and reinforced by decades of political consensus. But 3 things broke that consensus. First, North Korea's missile program accelerated to the point where Japanese cities faced credible, regular threats. Second, China's military buildup in the East China Sea made the status quo increasingly dangerous. And third, this is where it gets interesting. Russian cruise missile strikes in Ukraine demonstrated exactly how effective long-range precision weapons could be, even against a larger adversary. By late 2022, Tokyo made a decision that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. They would acquire counterstrike capabilities. Not just defensive systems, but weapons specifically designed to hit enemy bases before those bases could launch attacks on Japan. The Tomahawk isn't new. The United States has been using various versions since the 1980s. But the variant Japan ordered, the Block Phi, represents a different level of capability than earlier models. We're talking about a subsonic cruise missile that flies at around 550 miles per hour, low enough to hug terrain and avoid radar detection, with a range exceeding 1,000 miles. Here's why that range number matters. Launch a Tomahawk from a destroyer positioned near Okinawa, and you can reach Shanghai, over 500 miles away. And launch from the Sea of Japan, and Beijing itself sits within the engagement envelope at roughly 800 miles. Even military installations deep in northeastern China, including naval bases and command centers, suddenly become targetable. The Block VV also features something earlier Tomahawks lacked: the ability to strike moving maritime targets. Previous versions could only hit fixed land targets. This version can hunt ships. That means China's aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, and supply vessels, the very platforms they'd need for any Taiwan operation, are now vulnerable hundreds of miles from Japan's coast. Japan isn't putting these on static launchers either. They're integrating Tomahawks into their Maya-class and Congo-class Aegis destroyers. These are some of the most advanced surface combatants afloat, equipped with the Aegis combat system that can track hundreds of targets simultaneously. Each destroyer will carry multiple Tomahawks in its vertical launch cells, right alongside air defense missiles. But here's the kicker: Japan didn't just buy the missiles, They negotiated technology transfer agreements that will allow Japanese defense contractors to eventually produce key components domestically. That's not a one-time purchase. That's building an indigenous long-range strike capability for the next 30 years. 400 missiles sounds like a lot, and it is. But the real impact isn't just the raw number, it's what those missiles force China to do. Every military installation, every command center, every naval base within 1,000 miles of Japan now requires dedicated air defense coverage. China already operates extensive surface-to-air missile systems, but they've been oriented primarily toward defending against American air power. Now they need to account for cruise missile threats coming from a completely different direction, at low altitude, potentially in coordinated waves. This creates what strategists call defense saturation problems. Let's say China wants to protect 50 high-value targets within Tomahawk range. They'd need to position hundreds of interceptors, systems like the HQ-9 or HQ-16, around each site. Those interceptors cost between $1 million and $3 million each. Even for China's defense budget, that's not trivial. And every missile tied up in static defense can't be used offensively. The math gets worse when you add in Japan's other capabilities. They're also developing a hypersonic glide vehicle expected to reach operational status this year. They're upgrading their submarine fleet with extended-range torpedoes, and they're working with the United States on co-development of advanced interceptors. Tomahawks are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. What China fears most isn't a single weapon system. It's the combined effect of Japan shifting from a purely defensive posture to one that can impose real costs deep inside Chinese territory. Because once Japan has that capability, the deterrence equation changes completely. Here's what kept Chinese planners up at night during the acquisition process: coordination with American forces. Japan and the United States have deeply integrated command and control systems. They conduct joint exercises constantly. If conflict erupted, Japanese Tomahawks wouldn't operate in isolation. They'd be part of a coordinated strike package that could include American submarines, bombers, and surface ships, all hitting targets simultaneously from multiple vectors. China's existing air defense network, sophisticated as it is, was designed to handle threats coming primarily from the Pacific, from carriers and Guam-based bombers. Now it has to defend against threats from the Northeast as well, splitting attention and resources. In war games, that kind of multi-axis threat significantly degrades defensive effectiveness. But there's one problem nobody's talking about enough. Japan's Tomahawk acquisition doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's triggering responses that could reshape the entire region's security architecture. South Korea is watching closely. They've got their own issues with North Korea, and they've already developed indigenous cruise missiles with ranges approaching 1,000 miles. If Japan normalizes long-range strike weapons, expect Seoul to expand their arsenal significantly. They have the industrial base, they have the technical expertise, and they have plenty of targets they'd like to hold at risk. Australia just announced they're acquiring Tomahawks too, over 200 missiles in their case. The Philippines is upgrading coastal defense systems with American-made precision weapons. Even Taiwan, already under enormous pressure from Beijing, is developing its own extended-range cruise missiles. What you're seeing is a fundamental shift in how American allies approach deterrence. For decades, they relied on the US nuclear umbrella and conventional forces for protection. Now, they're building their own long-range strike capabilities, weapons that can impose costs without necessarily involving American forces directly. This is where everything changed for China's strategic calculations. They're not just facing one adversary with Tomahawks. They're potentially facing 4 or 5, all around their maritime periphery, all capable of striking deep into their territory. Chinese state media has been remarkably blunt about their concerns. One article in the Global Times called Japan's acquisition a dangerous step toward remilitarization. Another warned that it undermines strategic stability in Asia. But the most revealing response came from Chinese military analysts who openly discussed the need to expand air defense networks and potentially revise targeting priorities to include Japanese military facilities. That last part is crucial. For years, Chinese military planning focused primarily on Taiwan and potential U.S. intervention. Now they're having to account for Japan as a separate, significant threat. That requires additional resources, different force postures, and revised operational plans. All because 400 missiles created a capability gap Beijing can't ignore. In late 2024, Japan conducted something unprecedented, a live-fire test of a Tomahawk missile from one of their Aegis destroyers. The target was over 600 miles away, positioned in the Pacific to simulate a strike against a hardened installation. The missile flew a complex route, demonstrating terrain following capability and the ability to adjust course mid-flight based on updated targeting data. The test succeeded. More importantly, it succeeded in view of multiple observers, including American liaison officers and, almost certainly, Chinese intelligence assets monitoring the area. This wasn't about proving the technology works. The United States has been using Tomahawks for decades. This was about demonstrating that Japan has the operational capability to employ these weapons effectively. Analysts envision a scenario where Japanese destroyers, though positioned in the Sea of Japan or East China Sea, could launch coordinated strikes against multiple targets, command and control nodes, radar installations, and missile batteries in the opening hours of a conflict. Those strikes wouldn't necessarily need to destroy every target. They just need to create enough chaos and degradation to give US and allied forces operational freedom. In simulated scenarios, even a moderately successful Tomahawk strike could delay Chinese operations by hours or days. In a Taiwan contingency, where timing is everything, that delay could be decisive. It could allow the American carrier groups to get into position. It could give Taiwan's defenders time to mobilize. It could fundamentally change the calculus of whether an invasion is even worth attempting. So, can Japan's acquisition of long-range strike weapons fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Western Pacific? The answer is yes, but not in the way most people think. 400 Tomahawks won't single-handedly stop a Chinese military that fields thousands of missiles and the world's largest navy. What they do is eliminate the cost-free aggression that China enjoyed for the past 2 decades. Here's what you need to remember. First, deterrence isn't just about matching capabilities, it's about imposing unacceptable costs. Japan now can strike targets that China absolutely cannot afford to lose. Command centers, naval facilities, critical infrastructure. Even the threat of losing those targets forces Beijing to rethink aggressive actions. Second, regional security architectures are shifting from US-centric to multilateral. Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines are all building independent strike capabilities, creating a web of deterrence that's harder for China to unravel. And third, this isn't the end of the arms race. It's the beginning of a new phase. Expect China to respond with expanded air defenses, more distributed military facilities, and potentially even more aggressive posturing to test Japan's resolve. The question now isn't whether Japan will use these missiles. The question is whether their mere existence changes Beijing's calculations enough to prevent the kind of crisis that would require their use. And what happens next? Whether other nations follow Japan's lead, whether China accelerates its own military programs, whether this leads to stability or escalation, will determine the balance of power in Asia for the next generation. We're entering uncharted territory. Japan hasn't fielded offensive strike capabilities like this since 1945. The psychological impact alone on both Chinese military planners and regional allies cannot be overstated. Every wargame now has to account for Japanese long-range fires. Every invasion scenario now includes the risk of strikes on mainland targets. Every escalation ladder now has additional rungs that didn't exist before. And Beijing knows something else that keeps them up at night. This is just the beginning. Japan's defense budget is climbing toward 2% of GDP. That's over $100 billion annually. They're not stopping at Tomahawks. Hypersonic weapons are in development. Indigenous cruise missiles are being designed. The exclusively defense-oriented policy that defined Japanese military thinking for 80 years is dead. What replaces it will reshape the entire Indo-Pacific strategic landscape. Because once you cross the line from defensive only to long-range strike, you don't go back. Japan just crossed that line, and the Pacific will never be the same.